Hi everyone, and welcome to our session with the Center for Parish Development that is 3 tech tips to keep you connected. I'm so glad that you're joining me today. My name is Rachel McDonald, and I work doing the communication for the Center for Parish Development, and I'm also a local church pastor in Bedford, Ohio. And I just want to greet you and welcome you this morning as we join for this special webinar helping share tech tips about how we can be connected as the church, maybe especially through this pandemic. So as we're gathering, I invite you today, if you're joining live or if you're joining any other time, to go ahead and if you feel so moved to share who you are and where you're joining us from. And especially if you have any questions for me about this topic today or anything else to do with the Center for Parish Development. We're open here to receiving your questions, to responding to anything you might have to say or share with us. So feel free to jump in at any point using the comments or by getting in touch with us via email. But once again, welcome. I'm Rachel, and this is a special little presentation about 3 tech tips to keep you and your church connected in this time. And I don't know about you, but for me, learning all the technology and keeping connected as we are now nearing and reaching the 1-year anniversary of the beginning of the pandemic is really stretching me to learn and grow and say, how do I keep up? How do I know what to do in terms of tech? How do I know what service to use, what program? How does it seem like everyone else knows what to do but me? Know if you experience those things or have felt maybe a little overwhelmed by what to do in terms of technology with your congregation, with your church, with whatever setting of ministry that you're in. Know that you're not alone. Many of us have experienced these challenges in this time. So this is going to help you get connected and find some simple ways to use perhaps what you already have and really benefit and grow based on the strengths that I believe all of us already have in terms of technology and keeping our churches connected. So I'm going to jump right in here with our very first tip, a tech tip to keep you connected in this time. And that is to start with what you know. Now, if you've come to listen to this to learn all these brand new things and to be super cutting edge, I have a secret for you. It's often better to use what you know than try something drastically new. Because as it turns out, with technology these days, there are so many ways we can be connected to one another. There's all the different social media platforms. There's email lists, there's email programs, there's websites. There are so many ways that we can utilize technology right now. We can easily get overwhelmed. So my first tip to you is to start with what you know. For me, my personal example of this is what happened even at the very beginning of the pandemic. Maybe some of you can remember that time. So like I said, my name is Rachel McDonald and I work doing communication for the Center for Parish Development, but I'm also a local church pastor. And I remember those early weeks of the pandemic where I was unsure how we were supposed to connect for worship. Now, I could have gone online and said, what are all the new streaming services? How do I get new camera equipment? But instead, I started with what I knew, which was using my phone and using Facebook Live. And that allowed me to reach out to my congregation in a way that I was more comfortable with and allowed me to sustain that connection and not suddenly be swamped by all these new and confusing things. So I would really encourage you, when you think about expanding your technology use in the church, don't go too far ahead of what you already know. It's okay to start with the services and the programs and the platforms you are already using. So I invite you to think about what some of those might be. Does your church already have a website? So who is it hosted by? What is the capacity? What can you put on your website? Does your church use Facebook? Great. So is the page active? Who's there? Who's in charge of it? Does your church have an email list or a database? That's another really good place to start. Because here's the second part of this first tip, because I want to squeeze in a little bit extra. So even if you start with what you know, I suspect that you are perhaps not an expert on all those services that you use. So take, for example, Facebook. Since I'm sharing this chat with you on Facebook this morning, I imagine that you at least use Facebook a little bit. But how much do you really know about Facebook and how to utilize it for a congregation or for a church setting? It can be a lot to keep track of all the new emerging things. So the second part of this tip of starting with what you know is to actually then schedule little bits of time where you can learn more about the services and the technologies that you are already utilizing. And there's a very simple way to do this. All you have to do is use that search engine at your disposal. You get to use YouTube, you get to use Google, and just search whatever technology that you're using. So in this case, we'll use Facebook as an example, and then insert the word tutorial. This might sound really simple, but there are so many technologies that have sort of just been put on top of us, and we haven't taken the time to learn them fully. Taking just 5 or 10 minutes every day, or maybe a half-hour block each week, to specifically go out and learn more about what you're already using, I promise you, will help increase your use of that technology and help you find new tips and tricks to be connected. And it's important to get in this habit of learning a little bit at a time, because all of these services, I promise you, all of the things you are already using do not stay still, but are constantly updating and changing and adapting. So you have to find a way to change and adapt alongside with them. So stick with what you know, but don't be afraid to schedule time for a few tutorials each week. Now this leads right in to my second tip for you, which is to utilize technology to keep connected. You have to be consistent. And here's what I mean by that. If you have been online at all in the past year, in the past 5 years, you have probably been overwhelmed by the amount of information you've seen. There is so much out there. Just think about, or maybe go in and tally it up one day. How many emails do you get in a day? How many posts do you see on Facebook? How many notifications do you get on your phone each day? Maybe you've limited these things, but for most of us, we see an awful lot of information when we are connected online. And so, to truly communicate, to get your message out there, you have to be consistent with sharing what you're doing. So for example, if your church only shares something once, how many people do you think are going to see it? Probably not that many. But if you can be consistent about sharing it across time through all the different services that you might use and commit to that, I promise you your engagement will go up. It's not dissimilar to a thing that we have trained a lot of church people to do very well, which is when many people went physically to church. I would say most churches, especially that I have participated in or been a part of, would hand out a bulletin each week, would have something printed that they would hand to a person. And almost always included in that bulletin was a space for announcements or news. So whether you knew it or not, that helped get people used to looking to the same place for the information each week. They would know they would maybe get this physical piece of paper, and they would know where to get information about what was going on. You only know how critical this is if you have ever changed some of these things in your congregation. I want you to know that using technology is not much different than something like a weekly bulletin. If you are using Facebook, if you only post once every so often, it doesn't really help people see or understand how to get information about your setting. However, if you schedule it consistently, have things go out weekly or at a set time, it can really help people understand where they can find information about what's going on or about who you are in a way that won't get overwhelmed by how much is out there on the internet. So I encourage you to think about what is one thing that you can make really consistent in your online communication. And here's where the technology really helps. If you are using a service like Facebook, or even something like an email service like MailChimp, even your standard Gmail has this these days, most platforms that are for communication have a scheduling function. So what you can do is create things and communication to go out consistently all at once. You don't have to do a Facebook post immediately as it happens. You can actually schedule one to come out every week, the whole way out into a month. Using scheduling tools is a great way for you to be consistent in your communication. So that was two things, two tips. First, start with what you know. Two, be consistent. And here's the third one. Be specific. Now, this might take a little bit of unpacking because so often what I find is when people are looking for help about technology, they want to know what everyone else is using and they want to know what everyone else is doing, and then they try to replicate that. My opinion is that can be an easy way to create a lot of trouble for yourself. Instead, I would encourage you to think about what is specific for your context that you can use that makes sense for you. And this is very much tied with that first idea of start with what you know. But let me give you a really good example. So like I mentioned, I work with the center helping out with communication, but I'm also a local church pastor. And with my congregation, through this time of pandemic, I was really thinking about what was a way that I could communicate who I was to the congregation and to new folks who were joining us, but also who we were about as a church, and in a way that really made sense of both me and the congregation. And so instead of following another model of something I saw elsewhere, I really thought about what are my gifts? What is specific to who I am and specific to what I know my congregation really loves. And what we have done over this time is started a new sort of series of videos called Bible and Baking, where because one of my greatest hobbies is baking things. So instead of trying to replicate what someone else was doing, I started with what I really knew and what I felt like I was good at. So I was able to do a series of videos where I would do a recipe. I set up a camera right in my kitchen, nothing fancy, it was just my phone, and talked about the recipe I was baking alongside a story from Scripture. That was a really specific thing. I hadn't really seen it anywhere else, and that was probably good because then I wasn't trying to replicate what someone else was doing. I was really forced to start with what were my gifts and what was something that I could do easily and well. This is where I invite you to think about your context and technology. What is specific to your church in terms of its gifts? Do you have talented musicians? Do you have people who like to call one another? Do you have artists? There's so many options and so many ways that our congregations specifically reflect the gifts that God has given them. If you start from those gifts and then find the technology, you're going to be a lot better off. So for example, if you know you have a congregation of artists or people who are really connected to visuals and photos and who always are sharing that and commenting on that and participating in the world by using visuals, then maybe your church wants to use an Instagram page because that's a way of getting visuals out there. However, if you know that your church is actually struggling with getting online and utilizing technology and really has a lot of folks who are just homebound and feeling disconnected, well, maybe you want to use a service like MailChimp that does emails, but also has a service integrated in where you can send postcards to people, sort of where high tech and low tech come together. Or maybe you have a lot of musicians and you have people who are really good at going through an old hymnal and playing songs that are from the public domain. Perhaps then what you want to do is set up a YouTube channel so that way you can record and share the music that your congregation has to offer. It's important to be specific and not to think that our technology has to mimic the things that we see around us. Because what might be within easy reach for one congregation could be very burdensome for another. So I invite you to really think about and start with your gifts, and that will help you find your specificity. Because here's the other trick to the way that technology connects us these days. The internet works really well because it helps people find unique groups of people doing specialized things. Let me kind of word that again. So the internet has allowed people from all over the country and the world to find one another when they are interested in very similar and specific things. So your church, your community, if it has something specific and unique to offer, by sharing that online and utilizing technology, you might be opening up the door to allow others to find that and resonate with the specificity of who you are. So let me do a little recap here. Here are your 3 tips. So 1, you want to start with what you know. Learn with the services that you're already engaged in. Don't worry about creating new accounts or finding the next newest thing. That can just overwhelm you and really burn you out. But first, learn how to be fluent with what you already use, and I promise you'll keep bumping into new things that way as well. Use those tutorials. Start with what you know. And the second thing is be consistent. Think about using scheduling so that way you don't have to worry about being present all the time, but that you can have a message that might go out weekly or bi-weekly, or something that just lets everyone know who's engaging with the world online that you're there, that your church is there, that you're present, that you have a habitual way of communicating with one another, so everyone can get in the habit of knowing where to look for information and updates. And then the third tip is to be specific and to really lean into what makes you unique, knowing that others will be able to find you now through the miracle of online connection. And also there's something really wonderful about being able to express your community's uniqueness in a way that really will connect with one another. I hope that these help you think through more specifically how technology can help you in your context, but I understand there might be some practical follow-up questions. So I want to invite you to always be in touch with me if you have any further questions or saying, you said a few words in there I didn't understand, or there were some specific services. I'm here and ready to help and maybe help you find some of those unique things for your context. And this is in part because this is part of what the Center for Parish Development does. It works with congregations to help them hear God's specific call for them and for their community. And so that's part of what I really feel compelled to in my role doing communication for the center, is to keep sharing the 50+ years of experience and resources, but now putting them out there in ways that you can access and understand through our store and our website and through little chats like this one. So that way the information and the wisdom that has been collected over time can be shared with all of you. So if you'd like to learn more and maybe get some of those consistent updates from us, I invite you to go to missionalchurch.org/email, and that's where you'll be able to sign up for our email newsletters that have more information about these things and so much more. I'm so grateful that you joined me today or whenever else you're tuning in. And again, be in touch if you have any questions, and many blessings on you and your ministry. Technology can be really overwhelming, especially in this time of pandemic. But I believe that God has equipped you with the gifts and skills you need for this time. So don't be afraid to start small, start slow, use what you have, and trust that being authentic, bringing your whole self to this, is really what is meaningful beyond knowing all the hippest and latest things. You being you is a gift. So thanks once again for joining. Be in touch, and I will see you all next time.